anyway, let's dive in. What is your position on China on trade in the wake of all this? How are we going to deal with this post-COVID? How do we rebalance that relationship that says, oh, by the way, you infected a lot of Americans and they died a lot of people around the world?
Well, there's multiple layers of trade, as a lot of people know. You know, the phase 1 agreement was just signed, which I was for, based on us being an agricultural district and the things that were happening with China. And I want to start this really quickly. If we have some 5th district slant, I don't know if people realize this, but Canada and Mexico actually, they account for 1/4 of our trade. China's about 7%. So I wanted to go ahead and put that out there for the 5th district, right? So, you know, our leading export partner is Canada. So Mexico and China are roughly the same on exports, but then we have a whole Asia contingent, Japan, South Korea, things like that. So when I talk about trade, I'm going to talk about it globally, and then I think I can winnow it down a little bit to the 5th district. So trade, what are we going to do? The first thing you're going to see, I think, in the next week, Chris, is you're going to see an end to Hong Kong special trade status. And I don't know if people are familiar with this. I'll try to explain it, but there is a special status based on their institutions, or their liberal institutions that they have, their government institutions, where Hong Kong had a special trade status. It's also sort of the financial capital of China. So it's going to hurt them pretty badly if we do this, and that's based on the loss of civil rights in Hong Kong, but it's also the base that they're dismantling their sort of their institutions that we supported. So that's the first thing. The second thing, when it comes to other trade issues, I believe you're going to see China start to sort of, gosh, how can I say this in a way that's not classified? I do think that they're going to start sort of taking out agricultural shipments and supplies from certain farmers based on the phase 1 agreement, like soybeans. We've seen that happening already, but you're also going to see a lot of technical reevaluation and adjustment with trade in China. I just talked to a bunch of business groups that are doing business with China. And when you're talking about the special list of products that China might have that are not allowed in the States, or they're not allowed to participate any longer, we know that their IP theft has been a sort of an issue that we've been dealing with for some time. And I want to give you an example of how that affects us. If they can steal or thieve certain things from our defense industry, say a Northrop Grumman or a Boeing or a CACI or a Leidos or an SAIC, or even within the government, they might have a defense posture and technology where they can actually apply defeat types of principles to our offensive weaponry or our defensive weaponry. So we are looking at sort of rejiggering manufacturing and doing a little bit more incentivization of, say, chips, right? What I talked the other day was chips, you know, switches, 5G, right? Computer products, anything in the data science arena, all that stuff is going to be reevaluated. So as the China task force gets spun up, Chris, there's a draft report due August 1st with a final on October 1st. People are going to want to pay attention to this. We're going to have an unclassified report with a classified annex. We need to be realistic about China. I know a lot of people think their communist rhetoric is just rhetoric. It is real. Chris had mentioned racism. Chris had mentioned that their nationalism. All of this is actually combined. They are not kidding. I've been dealing with China now for years. I started dealing with Huawei years ago in the National Security Agency. Chris, there has to come a time where we look at this pragmatically, and I do believe there's going to be some short-term pain with our technical readjustment on trade and what's happening with the free trade or with the trade agreements we have with Hong Kong. So I just want people to be aware this is happening, and we are going to go forward with it.
This is one of the areas that when I talk to business leaders across the state, sometimes across the country, and we review President Trump, and you know, it's something on the week of an eye roll, like, oh, what did he do today? You know, a tweet here, and we get that noise that goes on in politics. But here's what I hear almost universally from business leaders. And for those of you paying attention, I'm not making this up. They say, you know, we don't like what he does, but we like some of the things. We don't like some of the things he says, but we like some of the things that he does that mean a lot to us. And almost universally, they say, you know, I don't like the guy, but he's right on China. And this is before all this happened, right? And
yes.
Is that an area where you look at, because you've had your disagreements with the president, and any right-minded thinking person should have a disagreement with anyone in the world. You know, we talk about your wife, my wife, we're going to have disagreements. You should, right?
Right.
I mean, it's natural. So is this an area where you look at the president and go, yeah, I'm with you on this one. Let's do this?
Yeah, and I can give some people some background on this. So, you know, I talked about the Pentagon calling me in March of 2016. March of 2016 is when we realized that we had a problem with Chinese insertion of technologies. And And it's also when we realized about economic encirclement based on Belt and Road. So 2016 should ring a bell for everybody. That was Trump's first year, right? So that's when we knew that we had a different way of doing business when you have R&D funds or R&E funds being dedicated to special threat systems, offensive cyber, critical infrastructure protect, hypersonics, satellite, I can't mention that, but I mean, working with satellites. All of this stuff was the package I was working on with 40 people from FFRDCs, federally funded research development centers, UARCs, which are universities for research. I was working with all these individuals and special programs around the world, and even with some Five Eyes partners, Chris. So this has already started. So I've been on the China train since 2016. And before that, I was a China and Russian threat expert, because I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but Russian baseline threats, China also took. They buy Russian missile systems like the S-300, the S-400, or air-to-air platforms, and they re-engineer them. So I was able to cross over into Chinese threat systems like Russian threat systems. So I'm completely aligned with the president on this, but a lot of this is very difficult to get across if you don't have the classified baseline. So Chris, what we've done is we're trying to translate classified issues into an unclassified report that gives overarching direction for new legislation and leveraging legacy legislation so we can go forward. Again, if China wants to come into the world game, right, and be transparent, for instance, they have invested $750 billion in foreign infrastructures over the last few years with their export credit agencies, which is our version of the Export-Import Bank, $750 billion. You know what we're at about that? About 2%, maybe 3%. We've tried, they are dominating us worldwide on infrastructure investment. And by the way, and I think a lot of people in business know this, if you own the infrastructure, you own the economy. And you own the access to that economy and the access to that information. We have got to get serious, guys. And I just find it amazing that we had a bipartisan group ready to go, Chris, in the China task force, and Nancy Pelosi pulled out and said it was a diversion after 13 months of trying to get this together. I have to question if maybe people aren't seeing the same information I am, or if politics are so tribal now that we can't even work across the aisle on something this important.
It's massively important. And for those of us who grew up in the Cold War, this is, and I don't want to put it in the context of the Cold War because I don't think we want to go down the road of a Cold War, but we have to be very real about China and their goals so that we are serving the interests of the American citizens.
Well, I don't want to, man, you said Cold War. Here's where it might be worse than the Cold War, and I'm not trying to be alarmist. The Cold War, we weren't economically engaged or intertwined with Russia in any type of global economy. Here, and I wish, I mean, if you look at, you know, right now it's like a root ball. I had somebody tell me this, where it's hard to extract some American companies and supply lines right now from China. What we need to do is to have a link and chain where we can extract those things that are a problem for the U.S. So how do we change that economic root ball into a link and chain where we can remove some of those links if things get hairy? And that really is the issue we have. Is I think we've had our head in the sand for so long. And I would say when I was the CEO of my other company during the Obama administration, it seemed like funding was being pulled away from R&E and also away from some of the other things where we had to start to rely on components that weren't American made. Research and engineering. I apologize. Research and engineering.
Just for the benefit of our audience, that's all.
Right. So we really had a difficult time with that. And what we saw was this spike in research and development or research and engineering funding in 2016 when the president was sworn in. And I thought that was very welcome at the time. So again, I know people can get mad at Twitter, and I do, you know, I'm like, just, you know, chill. But when it comes to the policy of China and our foreign threat posture, I've never seen a president more directed in mission. And that's something that people, I think, need to realize.
Well, I think he's understood that the thinking going into, you know, China joining the World Trade Organization is that they'll liberalize, they'll become more democratic, because we're trading, they'll become more like us. And that's just a bad read on Chinese culture.
Yeah, until they're not, right, Chris? Until they're not. And here's what I said earlier. Why is China allowed to participate in the fruits of the free market without having the responsibilities? Right. And I think that's something that all of us have to look at. And I know there could be some pain initially, but if we don't reset in a pragmatic way our relationship with China, the problems that we're going to have in the next decade are extreme.
Well, I think this is an area where both political parties have to put down their weapons that they're pointing at each other and say, we have got to come up with a long-term national strategy for China, and it has to be realistic. We can't have this, well, we do a lot of business with them, so because the American consumer, the American, the consumer is going to determine, where they're going to buy their products from, no matter what, right?
That's right.
I don't care where these shoes are made. As an example, I'm still not buying them if they're made in China. I mean, can you imagine someone going to the store and saying, I want to buy stuff from China right now? I just don't think it's there. But we have to be realistic that we are intertwined, like you said. Much of our, especially our supply chains and logistics are so tied up with China right now. And this Hong Kong moment is extraordinary. And today is the anniversary of Tiananmen Square.
Yes, it is. Goodness. Yes, it is.
And then when our neighbors, 2 doors down, they have had students from actually Wuhan, Hubei province, stay with them, and then probably about a dozen over the years. And we had a dinner with them back in the summer, the fall. And we were talking about various and sundry things, and we followed up with Jan and Jim. We said, hey, how are those kids doing, And, oh, fine. And they discovered that they had never even heard of Tiananmen Square Massacre.
I did not know that. That is actually shocking.
China,
that is shocking. Nobody knows it. Yeah,
nobody knows it. Nobody knows about Tiananmen Square in China.
Just shocking that China would, how shocking that they would hold information from all of us. Are you kidding me? But no, that's why
their own people don't know that this took place. And so when the people in Hong Kong, and I think Boris Johnson needs some credit here for saying we still going to uphold our agreement and start basically repatriating the Hong Kongese into Great Britain.
And I'm not opposed to that. And by the way, if you really want to have a lot of fun, try to get on Weibo or WeChat, the Chinese social media, Twitter and Facebook, right? If you really want to try to do that, they got the Great Chinese Firewall there, as you know. It's very hard to penetrate. The only way to really get out is through VPN or something like that, right? So there's a lot of challenges we have to get information into China, about freedom and free markets and really what's happening. And you got to give it to them. Their rhetoric is, Chris, as you mentioned, to come full circle, to get onto the WTO was really cover for them just really expanding their empire without, again, being a member of the OECD, right? Or being a member of any type of regulatory agency that really can oversee what they're doing. The WTO notwithstanding, it's really, they're beyond the pale now. I mean, they've gone beyond whatever type of transparency we thought we could see in them. And I would really want people to look into this, look into China, look at what they say. And if you want to really get a crazy sort of look into Chinese thought and culture, look at what their leading government officials say about America, about nationalism, about communism, and what they say over and over again. Look at the words that they say in English translation, and that will tell you exactly what they're thinking. This is not some kind of polemical exercise by the Chinese. Okay,
and you're on the China Task Force. Just briefly, what is that? Is that a bipartisan group of House members, or House and Senate?
Supposed to be. McCarthy had chosen 15 of us up through the president. So there's 5 pillars of that. I'm on the national security and defense or technology pillars. So you get from my background, it probably makes sense. So what we're doing, we have 15 people that's coming out with a report on October 1st, but it's looking in the future of the gaps we have to address for the Chinese in those 5 areas. What we have to do, like for instance, economics and energy, competitiveness, ideology, all that is part of the Chinese task force and the China task force. And I'm very proud to be on it and very, very honored to be only one of 15 in Congress that was chosen to do this.
Well, it's those of us who grew up in the Cold War era, we got sort of comfortable by not having to look at Russia and China, and we're back. And
Chris, what was I, 2021 when the wall came down, and I remember, right? I mean, I was born in 1970, so we knew the Cold War was going on. Let me tell you. And I joined the military in '92, and we still had Cold War doctrine in our intelligence technical orders, right? I mean, holy cow, right? I've been able to go from the Cold War to the War on Terror to now this sort of non-kinetic world of cyber and critical infrastructure warfare all in my career. And I got to tell you, I don't know if there's a more tumultuous time, but to be more blessed to have these experiences. I don't know if there's a person more blessed than me to live through all of that and to do the things that I've done.
It's got to be interesting.